On Sunday, US President Donald Trump said NATO should do whatever it takes to assist the US in the Persian Gulf, suggesting Europe could send minesweepers or commando teams to, quote, knock out some bad actors along the Iranian shore. This came a day after Trump called on the UK, France, South Korea, Japan and China in a Truth Social post to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz, a key choke point through which 20% of the world's oil passes, which Iran has forced shut by striking tankers and mining it, with global oil markets now facing the largest disruption in history. In response, though, NATO countries have either rejected or reacted with ambivalence to Trump's demands, dashing his hopes for a naval coalition around the strait. So, in this video, we'll discuss Trump's appeal to NATO and how Europe is responding. We've heard a lot of talk about Europe de-risking or decoupling from the US recently, so in the latest edition of our magazine, we thought we'd discuss whether this is actually feasible and why Europe could still struggle without US backing. That's just one of 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. Let's start with some context on Europe's evolving response to the US's war in Iran. Initially, after the US and Israel attacked Iran in late February, European leaders seemed quietly supportive, with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen saying on X that a credible transition in Iran was urgently needed. French President Emmanuel Macron saying Iran has no other option but to engage in good faith in negotiations to end its nuclear and ballistics programs, and German Chancellor Merz saying now is not the time to lecture our allies. However, some European leaders, notably Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, were more critical, with Sanchez calling the US-Israeli strikes an unjustified and dangerous military intervention outside international law. However, as it became clear that Trump's Iran operation wasn't going to be quick or clean, any European support quickly waned. While European leaders have deployed additional military assets to the region, the UK, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, the Netherlands and Spain all sent some combination of warships, jets and air defence systems to the eastern Mediterranean, they stressed this was a purely defensive move, helping their regional allies defend against Iranian attacks. Polls in several European countries have also found that large shares of the population opposed the US-Israeli war on Iran. A flash poll in Spain for El País Cadena SER in early March found that 2/3, 68.2%, of Spaniards opposed the attack on Iran, while only 23.2% supported it. In Italy, 56% opposed the US-Israeli attack. In Germany, 58% thought it was unjustified, and even in the UK, 59% opposed it. However, European countries have since come under pressure from Trump to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. For context, the Strait of Hormuz is the only maritime passage between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, with around 20% of the world's oil passing through the strait, flowing out to consumers in Asia and Europe. But it's been effectively shut for the past 2 weeks due to drone strikes on tankers, with Iran apparently also mining it. This is the main reason oil prices are on the up, rising above $100 a barrel for the first time since 2022, sparking economic concern about a potential global energy crisis. There were some reports last week that the US Navy would be escorting ships through the strait to effectively restart traffic, but this hasn't happened yet, and countries have instead been forced to dip into their strategic oil stockpiles. Last week, the International Energy Agency, or IEA, agreed to release a record 400 million barrels of oil reserves to offset supply shortages, with Japan also announcing it would start releasing about 45 days' worth of oil from its stockpiles this week. Despite essentially causing this disruption, Trump has recently started arguing that the US's NATO allies should form a naval coalition to help reopen the strait. On Sunday, Trump suggested European and NATO countries should offer warships or military commandos, saying in a phone call with the FT, it's only appropriate that people who are the beneficiaries of the strait will help to make sure that nothing bad happens there, adding, if there's no response, or if it's a negative response, I think it will be very bad for the future of NATO. Trump also referred to Ukraine, saying, we've been very sweet. We didn't have to help NATO with Ukraine, but we helped them. Now we'll see if they help us. So, will Europe come to Trump's rescue and help him reopen the Strait of Hormuz? Well, the short answer seems to be no, at least not in the way that Trump's been demanding. European leaders have made clear that Trump's war in Iran isn't a NATO issue, with a spokesperson for German Chancellor Friedrich Merz saying on Monday that it has nothing to do with NATO and is not NATO's war. Similarly, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that while the UK was working with allies on a plan to reopen the strait, this wouldn't be a NATO mission, and insisted that the UK will not be drawn into the wider war. France, Greece, Italy, Spain and Norway have also ruled out sending warships to the strait, as have non-European allies Japan, Canada and Australia. Now, this is in part because of politics. As we mentioned earlier, Trump's war in Iran really isn't popular in Europe, and most Europeans want their governments to stay out of it. Not least because Trump has spent most of the past year mocking Europe and accusing it of being weak and ineffective. More generally, in recent months, it's become clear that there's an electoral advantage for European politicians to oppose Trump, as evidenced by the poll bump that both Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen have enjoyed after their recent showdowns with Trump. But it's not just good politics. There are also good strategic reasons for Europe to resist Trump's pressure to deploy naval assets to the strait. For starters, it's not really clear what Europe could actually add. The US Navy is massive, many times bigger than any European navy, so if it can't restart traffic through the strait, then a couple of European frigates probably won't make much of a difference. More importantly though, Europe's strategic priority in Iran is probably de-escalation, or at least Europe has more of an incentive to push for de-escalation than the US does. This is simply because Europe is more exposed to the negative externalities stemming from Iranian instability than the US is. Europe would be more exposed to any post-war refugee crisis, for instance, as well as any terror threats emanating from a destabilised Iran. Europe is also more exposed to the Iran-induced energy crisis, both because Europe is a net energy importer, while the US is actually a net exporter, and because, as we've detailed in a previous video, rising oil prices massively benefit Russia, which is also now enjoying sanctions relief from the US. This comes at the perfect time for the Kremlin, which had previously been coming under some financial pressure, and the subsequent windfall from oil revenues will presumably be used to finance Putin's war in Ukraine, which is Europe's primary strategic threat. So you get the idea. Europe's strategic priority is de-escalation, but sending warships to the strait would probably have the opposite effect. Iran has warned European countries that they would become legitimate targets if they become more involved in the war, and acceding to Trump's demands might also encourage him to continue escalating, safe in the knowledge that, when push comes to shove, Europe will support him. Instead, Europe will probably be tempted to follow India's lead and try to strike some sort of deal with Iran to negotiate safe passage for their ships, as France and Italy are apparently already doing. As we mentioned earlier, the latest edition of our magazine Too Long is out now, which means that if you order a physical edition, it'll be shipped to you immediately, and if you buy a digital edition, it'll land in your inbox straight away. No pre-ordering, no waiting. Plus, if you subscribe while you're there using code SPRING26, you'll get your first copy for as little as £4.99, as well as 20% off every future issue as long as you stay subscribed. One other thing to know is that if you're more of a listener than a reader, which would be fair enough, we are a YouTube channel after all, then this time round we've recorded every article in Too Long, with each of our writers doing their best audiobook impression while narrating their own articles.
The New Age of Empires. Written and read by Georgina Finley.
If you want that, then you can sign up to our new Too Long and TLDR Party bundle. That gets you a copy of the magazine, but also access to TLDR Party, our new subscription. Party members not only get access to the audio versions of every article, they also get access to our documentaries, like our new series Leaders and Losers and our upcoming documentary we're recording in Greenland right now. They get access to our behind-the-scenes podcast, The Bullpen, our bonus podcast, The Last Move, their name printed in every issue of our magazine, and more. Find out more about TLDR Party by clicking the link in the description, where you'll also find a link to subscribe to Too Long and our documentaries.